So, others themselves. This is just a point I want to make kind of briefly, but okay. So I talked just in passing a second ago about the fact that that Great Britain, that island, has more than one nation on it, and one of so there's this concept, particularly important from thinking about like group identity, right? Of who is the self and who is the other, who is like us, who is different from us, and the play definitely works to, even though by the time the play is performed, right, in the 1590s, Wales has become much more clearly under the control of the English of England and English monarchy and so on. The heir to the throne, in fact, is called the Prince of Wales, right? And that's historically the heir to the throne is called the Prince of Wales, and so Hal is himself a Prince of Wales. Technically, right, there was no Prince of Wales in England in the 1590s because Elizabeth didn't have any children, didn't have an heir, and that kind of thing. But in any case, the Welsh are this kind of like us but not like us, right? And particularly medieval Wales is kind of being portrayed as so exotic and different and so on. And there are ways that this gets brought up in the play, and that's a really kind of complicated situation here. So first of all, the way that it gets brought up in the play, one, just in the very first scene in Act 1, Scene 1, the defeat of the Welsh, or sorry, the victory of the Welsh over that English army led by Mortimer is accompanied by sort of inhumane, barbarous, brutal behavior. This is Act 1, Scene 1 at line 34. So we hear, this is at line 37, a post from Wales loaded with heavy news, whose worst was that the noble Mortimer, leading the men of Herefordshire to fight against that irregular and wild Glendower, was by the rude hands of the Welshmen taken, 1,000 of his people butchered. So Mortimer's military force has been defeated by the Welsh. And then, this is the barbarous or inhuman part on top of it, upon whose dead corpses there was such misuse, such beastly, shameless transformation by those Welsh women done as may not be without much shame retold or spoken of. All right, so there's this historical detail in Shakespeare's source, in fact, that the bodies of the English soldiers were mutilated by the Welsh women who followed the Welsh army out into the battle and so on. And in fact, at least the details of that mutilation are that the Welsh women castrated the bodies of the English soldiers and stuck their genitals in their mouths as in the dead corpses' mouths as a kind of humiliation. Okay, so I mean, that's supposed to make the Welsh seem bloodthirsty, irrational, not particularly human, brutal, etc., etc. Further, kind of exoticizing the Welsh is the character Owen Glendower, the captain, the leader of the Welsh and the Welsh forces, who is a historic figure, by the way. In Act 3, Scene 1, so after that, the tavern scene that we started with today, the intervening scene before Hal goes to meet with the king is Act 3, Scene 1, where the rebels meet in Wales to kind of plot out their rebellion and talk about how it's going to unfold and so on. And Glendower is kind of sort of makes a claim for himself to being in touch with the supernatural, right? To being like a wizard. And again, there's a kind of historical aspect of people kind of imagining or treating Glendower as some kind of magic figure, some kind of a wizard and so on. So he starts by just saying that he, had that there was something supernatural about his birth. He says in Act 3, Scene 1, "At my nativity, the front of heaven was full of fiery shapes of burning cressets, and at my birth, the frame and huge foundation of the earth shaked like a coward." That's on page 57, and I'm going to turn to page 58 in just one second. But Glendower says, there were ominous signs, prodigies at the time of my birth. Hotspur, the skeptic, replies, "Why, so it would have done at the same season if your mother's cat had but kittened, though yourself had never been born," right? So at the second of your birth, presumably there were cats that were also giving birth to kittens. do these ominous portents apply to the birth of those cats? No, of course not. So why do you think that they apply to you, right? And Glendower, I say the earth did shake when I was born. And Hotspur, and I say the earth was not of my mind, if you suppose as fearing you it shook, right? So one of the things we see here is that Hotspur's just a jerk, right? I mean, he doesn't, this is a guy he needs to be good to. He needs him to be a part of his alliance. And he's just a kind of jackass in terms of how he responds to Glendower's, sort of self-important, the story that he likes to tell about himself. Anyway, this goes on. I'm not going to go on here, but just this opening exchange between Hotspur and Glendower in the next couple of speeches and so on, about the fact that Hotspur claims that Glendower claims that he is magical and supernatural and all this other kind of stuff, and Hotspur keeps trying to kind of take him down a peg and show this is just a bunch of hot air and hooey. One of my favorite moments in this line is at line 53 when Glendower says, "I can call spirits from the vasty deep." And, like in other words, I can summon up demons, right? Hotspur, why so can I, or so can any man, but will they come when you do call for them? This kind of like, I dare you to actually summon a demon right now. Let's see it happen. Okay. I think, by the way, that there is actually a little tiny suggestion that maybe Glendower has a little bit of some kind of magic to him or whatever. You don't have to necessarily go along this far, but at Act 3, Scene 1, when some music is going to play, Act 3, Scene 1, line 221, they're about to sing, and Glendower says, "Do so, and those musicians that shall play to you hang in the air 1,000 leagues from hence, and straight shall they be here. Sit and attend." And so, there is some music that is coming onto the stage at this point. It's being played by the guys up at the top of the gallery in the actual theater. But as far as the people who are on stage are concerned, they can't actually see anybody playing music, right? So you can make that look like it's some kind of fairy music or something like that. Anyway, so you got Glendower trying to claim that he can do magic and is part of the supernatural. That exoticizes the Welsh, make them seem superstitious. And in fact, one of the reasons why Glendower is not going to show up at the battle at Shrewsbury is because he's read some sort of portent, some sort of omen that he's not supposed to show up, right? And so he's sort of held at bay by a kind of superstition, right? This kind of exotic superstition. And then one of the things that I just particularly love about this scene, and which I think is really complex and interesting, is how Shakespeare deals with the idea of a language other than English. I've written about this, so I'm sorry, I'll try not to go on to it at too great a length, but Shakespeare, he does create characters who speak languages that aren't English at various points in his plays. One of the things that I think is really interesting is the strategy that he uses right here. So Mortimer doesn't speak Welsh, and he has married at this point Glendower's daughter, and she doesn't speak any English. And so when the women get brought back on stage here in Act 3, Scene 1, Glendower's daughter is going to sing. This is on page 67. It's earlier than that. It's on page 65 at line 195. So she's crying, right, because her husband is going to go off to war and she doesn't want him to do it. And Glendower, who speaks Welsh and English, has to sort of translate for her, but we don't actually ever hear what she has to say. We only hear Glendower translating for her. At line 195, the stage direction, Glendower speaks to her in Welsh, and she answers him in the same. And Glendower, she is desperate here, a peevish, self-willed harlotry, one that no persuasion can do good upon, right? She's distraught, and there's no calming her down. 197, the lady speaks in Welsh. And Mortimer, I understand thy looks. That pretty Welsh which thou pourest down from those swelling heavens, I am too perfect in. That pretty Welsh, right? So not the actual Welsh, but the fact of her tears. That's how he can understand what she means. You actually have a character who is exotic, foreign, not English, right? This Welsh princess who can't speak Mortimer's language, and who is this kind of sort of an object in the play instead of a character in the play. Now, So, what's the point of, what's the purpose of this kind of exoticization? Well, there's a couple things. One, there's the fact that this idea to kind of keep the other at bay may not actually be able to kind of actually do that. When in the final battle, after Hotspur is dead and Falstaff is lying, he's faking his death and he's lying near Hotspur. He says. This is on page 113, 114. That's Act 5, Scene 4, a long speech starting at line 110. He's been talking about honor, right? He's been talking about the fact that here's Hotspur who's dead, right? This guy who had all this honor, now he's dead. And then he says at line 126, right? Contemplating the fact that he's been faking his own death, he at least considers the possibility, could Hotspur be faking his death? And he says at line 124, why may not he rise as well as I? Nothing confutes me but eyes, and nobody sees me. Therefore, Sirrah, stabs him. With a new wound in your thigh, come you along with me, right? Now, one of the things is that Falstaff at this point is going to claim that he killed Hotspur, and even though Hal knows that that's not true, he's going to go along with it, and because it doesn't matter to him that much, and he's willing to kind of let Falstaff get a little bit of false glory for himself. But what's interesting, right, is the fact that Falstaff stabs Hotspur in the thigh, right? It's almost a genital wound as well, right? And it's not all that different from it's certainly not different from what the Welsh women did in terms of desecrating the dead body of a warrior on the battlefield. That is exactly and structurally the same, but it's also really similar in the sense of it's almost a castrating kind of wound, right? And if that's the case, then you have this kind of erasure of the difference between those barbarous, strange, exotic Welsh and we honorable English or whatever. I mean, Falstaff is doing just what the Welsh women have done. Finally, I'm just going to mention as a kind of a passing comment here, Owen Glendower, the Welsh leader of this battle, he eventually is this is not in the play, but it works itself out in in one of the next plays, and then just in terms of English history. But Hal, in the next play, he's going to marry a French princess when the English defeat the French. And then when Henry V dies, that French princess ends up marrying Owen Glendower. And Owen Glendower is the great-grandfather of Henry VII, the Tudor king, who becomes the monarch of England and solves the tension of the Wars of the Roses and so on. And so, even though the Welsh are being kind of treated as superstitious, exotic, different, foreign in the play, they are also the source of the Tudor solution to the Lancaster-York problem. So there's a real kind of nice symmetry there at the end of the play.